They said no one ever walked away from the auction block without scars. Men left with lighter pockets. Women left with heavier hearts. And tonight, under the lanterns that swung over the dusty wooden stage, she stood with her hands clenched tight, her eyes brimming with tears she tried to hide. People called it an auction, but it was a spectacle, bids thrown like stones at her dignity. She thought she'd be swallowed by shame forever. Then one man's voice cut through the noise like thunder rolling across the plains. A cowboy. His words didn't sound like a bid. They sounded like a vow. Now you'll only know joy. The night was heavy with dust and smoke, the kind that clung to throats and made every breath burn a little sharper. Lanterns swung on iron hooks nailed into warped wooden beams, their flickering light throwing restless shadows across the auction block. The crowd pressed close, a mix of ranch hands, saloon men, and merchants with gold coins burning holes in their pockets. Some laughed too loud, some chewed tobacco and spat on the ground as if to mark their claim on whatever prize they thought they'd walk away with tonight. And in the middle of that raucous noise stood Clara, her bare feet planted on splintered boards, her trembling hands folded tight against her chest. She tried to stand still, but her knees quivered so hard she thought they might give way beneath her. Every time the auctioneer raised his voice, she flinched. His calloused hand gestured toward her like she was nothing more than stock, a piece of property to be handled, traded, discarded. Strong back, steady hands, he boomed. A worker for your fields or a helper in your homes. Who'll give me 50 to start? His words sliced through the air, each one pulling her dignity apart stitch by stitch. A cheer rose up from the men, coins clinked in palms, and her heart sank deeper into the hollow pit of her chest. She tried to look past them, beyond the crowd, to where the night stretched open into the prairie, wide and endless. Somewhere out there was the life she had once imagined. She could see flashes of it if she tried, her father smiling from the porch of their farm before dead and drought swallowed everything, the wildflowers she used to gather in the spring, the dream of children running barefoot through fields of wheat that never turned to dust. Those visions felt like ghosts now, memories that haunted her even as her present chained her to shame. Her throat burned with unshed tears. She wanted to cry, to scream, to beg for mercy, but she knew better. Mercy wasn't something men like these dealt in. They only dealt in numbers, and the numbers began to climb. 60, 70, 80. Do I hear 90? The crowd jeered and roared, voices crashing like waves against her fragile composure. One man at the front, a thick-set rancher with a grin too sharp, cupped his hands around his mouth. She'll do fine for cookin' and cleanin'. 95. His voice was coated in arrogance, and the thought of stepping into his world made her stomach twist. The auctioneer slapped the side of his podium, eyes bright with greed. That's the spirit. Who'll make it 100? Clara's breath quickened. It wasn't just a number. It was her life being measured, traded, and reduced. Shame pressed down on her shoulders heavier than any weight she had ever carried. She wondered if she would ever laugh again, if she would ever wake without fear. She wondered if this was all God had left for her. And then, something shifted. At the back of the crowd, leaning against a wooden post as if he had all the time in the world, stood a man she hadn't noticed before. His hat was tilted low, shadowing his face, but even from a distance she could see the broad set of his shoulders, the dust caked on his boots, the quiet way he held himself. He didn't shout, didn't jeer, didn't even move when the crowd surged with excitement. He just watched. Her gaze caught his for only a flicker of a second, but it was enough. His eyes weren't hungry like the rest. They didn't strip her down or weigh her worth. They were steady, calm, carrying something she hadn't seen in longer than she could remember. Compassion. She tore her eyes away quickly, afraid to hope, afraid that if she let herself believe he was different, it would break her even more when he joined the bidding. The auctioneer's voice grew harsher. 100, gentlemen, this is a deal you won't see again. She's worth more than that. 110, someone shouted. Clara's breath hitched. Her pulse pounded in her ears, so loud she almost didn't hear it when another voice rose, clear and deep, cutting through the noise like a bell tolling in a storm. Enough. The word was quiet, but it rolled across the crowd with a weight that silenced every shout. Heads turned, mutters rippled through the air, and Clara's wide eyes darted toward the source. The man at the post was no longer leaning back, he was stepping forward. The crowd shifted as he passed, some men muttering under their breath, others watching him with narrowed eyes. His steps were slow, unhurried, each one purposeful. When he reached the stage, his shadow stretched long, brushing the tips of Clara's toes. He tipped his hat back, revealing a face carved by the sun and wind, lines of hardship etched deep, but softened by something rare. His eyes, she saw them clearly now, were the color of storm clouds, and they met hers with a steadiness that made her knees buckle. The auctioneer frowned, drumming his fingers nervously against the wood. "Sir, if you'd like to bid." The cowboy's voice cut him off, firm and steady. "I'm not here to bid." A wave of confusion swept through the men, a ripple of disbelief. "What do you mean not here to bid?" one shouted. The cowboy ignored them all, his gaze locked on Clara, as if the rest of the world had vanished. His voice lowered, soft enough to feel like it belonged only to her, but strong enough for everyone to hear. "Now you'll only know joy." The words sank into her like water into dry soil. Her chest rose with a shudder, and the tears she had held back broke free, spilling down her cheeks. She had no words, no strength to answer, but something inside her shifted, hope flickering back to life like a flame catching in the wind. The auctioneer sputtered, "That's not how this works. This is a transaction, not a..." The cowboy pulled a small leather pouch from his coat and dropped it on the podium. The weight of coins inside thudded heavy, louder than any argument. The auctioneer's greedy eyes darted to the pouch, then to the man, then back again. It was more money than any bid they'd had so far, maybe more than any they'd seen all night. His hesitation crumbled in the face of profit. "Sold," he barked quickly, banging his fist down. "Sold to the gentleman." The crowd erupted in murmurs and scoffs, but Clara didn't hear them. She heard only the sound of her own heartbeat, thundering as the cowboy stepped closer. When her feet finally left the stage, her body weak from relief and fear mingled together, he was there to catch her. His hand brushed her arm, steady and warm, not gripping, not pulling, just holding her upright as if he understood that she'd been holding herself up alone for far too long. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice so low only she could hear. Clara looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit, but all she found was quiet certainty. And though her tears still fell, they no longer tasted of despair. They tasted of something she had thought lost forever, hope. The prairie was quiet under the wide stretch of night sky, the moon spilling pale light over the land like a watchful guardian. The horse moved at a steady pace, its hooves beating a rhythm against the dirt road, a rhythm that matched the chaos of Clara's heart. She clung lightly to the back of the cowboy's coat, the rough fabric scratching her palms, and though her body leaned into his for balance, her mind fought against the urge to trust the stranger who had pulled her out of the nightmare. For the first few miles, she said nothing. Silence was safer. Words could bind her in ways chains never could. The cowboy didn't speak either. His posture was easy in the saddle, confident without arrogance. He rode like a man who belonged to the land, who had wrestled storms and droughts and come through them with quiet strength. Clara studied the way he handled the reins, the steadiness in his shoulders, the calm he carried like a shield. She wanted to ask him why he had chosen her, why he had thrown down money when the others only saw her as a possession. The question swirled inside her chest until finally, it spilled into the night air, soft and trembling. "Why?" He tilted his head slightly but didn't look back. "Why what? Why would you do that? For me?" Her voice cracked on the last word, shame tugging it into a whisper. He drew in a long breath, the kind of breath that carried more than air. It carried memories, burdens, choices he didn't speak aloud. "Because no one deserves what I saw back there," he said simply. "No one." His answer wasn't grand, not a declaration, not wrapped in poetry. But it was enough to still the tremor in her chest. For the first time in years, someone had looked at her and seen a person, not a price. She tightened her grip on the back of his coat, not because she feared falling from the horse, but because she was afraid of what it meant to believe him. By the time the horizon blushed with the first streaks of dawn, they had reached his land. The ranch rose from the earth in quiet dignity, not rich or grand, but sturdy, lived in, and warm. A wooden cabin stood with smoke curling from the chimney, a barn rested nearby with a corral holding a few horses, and fields stretched wide, kissed by the early light. Clara's throat tightened. It was the kind of place she had once dreamed of having with her family before death and loss had stolen everything. He dismounted with ease, then turned and held his hand out to her. She hesitated, her eyes flicking between his hand and the ground. Trusting anyone had cost her dearly before, but something about the steadiness in his gaze urged her forward. She placed her hand in his, and he helped her down, not pulling, not rushing, just steadying her like a man who understood that even the smallest gestures could wound her heel. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said as her feet touched the earth. His voice carried no expectation, no hidden demand. No one will hurt you again. Her chest tightened. But, I have nothing. No money, no family, not even clothes worth keeping. She shook her head, shame seeping into every word. I don't even have a name worth saying anymore. His eyes softened as he studied her, not with pity but with quiet strength. Then you start fresh. Sometimes the best things are built from nothing. The words clung to her long after he walked ahead to tend the horse. She stood in the dawn light, feeling the weight of her past pressing hard against the fragile hope blooming in her chest. Could she really begin again? Could someone broken and discarded be remade into something whole? Days passed, and she learned the rhythm of the ranch. He never asked her to work, never demanded she earn her keep, but Clara couldn't stand the thought of idling. She fed the chickens, swept the cabin, patched tears in worn shirts she found folded neatly in a trunk. Little by little, she felt her hands remember what it was to create instead of being used. The land itself seemed to welcome her, the fields stretching open with promise, the wildflowers nodding their heads as though reminding her that beauty could rise from soil long forgotten. Nights were the hardest. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams of the auction, of voices shouting numbers, of hands reaching for her. She would wake with her chest tight, tears burning her cheeks, and sit on the edge of the bed trembling. More than once, she found him sitting on the porch, his silhouette outlined by starlight, keeping watch without intruding. When she couldn't bear the silence, he would hand her a cup of warm tea and sit quietly beside her, not pressing her to speak, not asking for more than she could give. His presence alone was enough to ease the weight of the nightmares. Slowly, she began to laugh again. At first, it startled her. The sound felt strange, foreign on her lips, but one morning when a hen pecked at her dress and sent her stumbling into a pile of hay, the laugh bubbled out before she could stop it. He looked up from where he was mending a fence, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, and she felt something warm unfurl inside her. Each day afterward, the laughter came a little easier, and she began to believe in the possibility of joy. But the world had not forgotten her, and the past had a way of clawing its way back. One afternoon, as she hung laundry on the line, the sound of hooves thundered toward the cabin. A man she recognized from the auction rode up, his sneer curling with malice. She doesn't belong here, he spat, dismounting with heavy steps. That money he threw down. It was a bid, not freedom. You can't just walk away from what you are. Clara froze, her breath shattering inside her chest. The nightmares she thought she had left behind came rushing back in a single wave. She thought of running, of hiding, of surrendering to the cruel truth that maybe she would never escape. But before she could move, the cowboy stepped between her and the intruder, his hand resting on his holster, his posture calm but unyielding. His voice was low, carrying the weight of unshakable conviction. She's not property. She's not anyone's but her own. And if anyone thinks otherwise, they'll answer to me. The man spat in the dirt, muttered curses, and finally mounted his horse again. You'll regret this, he growled before riding off, dust clouding the horizon in his wake. Clara's knees nearly buckled, but the cowboy turned to her, steady as always. Don't be afraid, he said softly. He won't take you from here. Not while I'm breathing. That night, under the expanse of stars, she sat beside him on the porch. The air was cool, the chirp of crickets filling the silence between them. Her hands trembled as she reached across and placed them over his. For a long moment, she couldn't find the words, her throat tight with emotion. Finally, they slipped out, fragile but desperate. You said I'd only know joy, she whispered. Do you really think that's possible? For someone like me? He turned his head, his storm gray eyes meeting hers with a gaze so steady it made her breath catch. I don't think, he said. I know. The words wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time in years, her tears were not born from despair. They were born from hope, from the fragile but powerful belief that maybe joy wasn't just a dream. Maybe it was real, maybe it was here, and maybe, just maybe, it was hers to claim.